Next malfunction we're going to talk about is called a stovepipe. It gets its name because it looks like an old-timey chimney sticking up out of your gun. Almost exclusively, it will be a spent piece of brass that did not fully eject. Occasionally, you may see a live round, but more often than not, it's going to be a spent casing, and it may be presenting sticking up like this. If you're doing your part and you are actively looking at your front sight, your hyper focus is here, then you're going to see there's something in your field of vision. That may be your clue that you have a stovepipe malfunction. Or if the piece of brass has fallen into the action as such, and there's nothing occluding your field of vision, your clue would be that you have a dead trigger. With a failure to fire, it went click instead of bang. With the stovepipe, because it's not in battery, your trigger is going to be squishy, or what we call a dead trigger. If this is the case, to fix this, all you have to do is slap, rack, reacquire the grip. Using whatever your primary go-to technique was that we just discussed. I prefer the slingshot technique. However, you must understand that the reason we did that vigorous inboard flip to gangster plus a degree or two is to ensure you have enough inertia, enough oomph to get that spent casing or whatever's in the ejection port to fling out, especially if your extractor or your ejector is damaged. You need that extra little degree to let that fall out. If you're coming back here using the overhand technique, then gravity is going to do what gravity does. No issues. All right, to stage the stovepipe so we can practice this, I'm going to lock the slide to the rear. I'm going to trap the slide with my thumb, and I'm going to slowly let the slide close onto the spent casing. I have induced a stovepipe malfunction. Now we're going to take our magazine of dummy rounds, go ahead and insert it into the gun. I'm going to go through this at full speed, and then we'll break it down back into the numbers. So as you can see, there's no change between the first malfunction we did and this malfunction. It's still a slap, rack, reacquire the grip. Now I'm going to clear the dummy round out, and we're going to set that back up again, and I'll go through it by the numbers. So, locking the slide to the rear, inserting the piece of brass, slowly closing the slide, inducing the double feed, inserting the mag of dummy rounds. No change to the failure to fire drill. We're still having but now we have a dead trigger instead of a click. Finger comes off the trigger, slap on the magazine because I don't want to psychoanalyze and figure out what's going on with the gun's life right now. I just want to fix it. Slap up on the magazine, rotate the gun while racking it, reacquire the grip. If it's still a legitimate target to shoot, continue engaging. Now we'll talk about the overhand technique. For the overhand technique, we're going to do the same as we did for a failure to fire. At full speed, and now clearing the gun, and we'll break it down by the numbers. Using the overhand technique to rack the slide as part of the slap, rack, reacquire the grip. Finger off the trigger, slap the magazine, simultaneously while pulling the gun back, acquire a grip on the rear of the slide, rack the slide, push the gun back out while reacquiring the grip, and continue engaging. Now, of note, there were some standards years back that would have you to fix a stovepipe. It would call for the shooter to knife hand in front of the ejection port, to knife hand and force the spent casing out. That is no longer taught, but some of those manuals are still floating around, or they may be institutionalized in some people's brains. Here's where I believe there was a flaw in that technique and why it likely went away. One, human nature. We don't practice with the handgun often enough. We don't practice malfunction drills often enough to keep them properly fluid in the right part of the brain. If I'm cutting myself because I'm using an empty casing with sharp edges as opposed to a dummy round that has nice smooth edges, if I cut myself, ouch, I'm not going to practice this technique. Two, there's nothing that's going to cause this to be any more effective than grabbing the slide behind the ejection port and racking the slide. Three, if we are occluding the airway, we may cause, as we're doing this, if the round doesn't fall out, we may cause a type of double feed. Or it becomes a moot point if, as it often does, the spent casing is sideways in the ejection port and not sticking straight up nice and tidy as we would stage it to test the drill under those old standards. So if we do the knife edge here, there's really no utility to it. Use either the slingshot technique or the overhand technique, clear the round or whatever's stuck in the action, and then get right back out on the threat.